So the first thing I wanted to ask you about is the times are changing, obviously, and many SaaS companies are moving away from growth at all costs and starting to focus on actually building a strong business. What is the advice that you are giving to some of the companies you work with as these times are changing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm actually coming out of two board meetings here in the last couple of weeks, so it's pretty fresh in my mind. I mean, I think the bottom line is I'm involved with companies that are between 5 million of revenue to hundreds of millions of revenue, and even those at the later stage are just having an incredibly hard time forecasting, predicting their top line. What is the demand from customers? And these are great companies with great value propositions. And so my reasoning to management teams and CEOs is like, hey, if you can't predict how much revenue and cash we'll bring in, let's just be super careful in investing behind that growth, right? We don't know how much yield we'll get for every dollar of investment. And so that's kind of a basic sort of mantra and I think many others are telling our management team, wait till the dollars are more valuable. It's not just about preserving the runway because multiples have come down and you don't want to raise a down round because that has ramifications. It's more about why don't we just wait till we know we can get out of every single dollar we invest? We know we can get more out of it. Right now, we just have no idea. And that's become even more evident, I think, right now in the middle of Q3, coming up to the end of Q3 for many companies, or Q3 already ended. And then the second thing is it's a little bit of a softer, but just as critically important, if not more, is more organizationally. I think oftentimes this message gets through to the CEO and CFO, and then the functional leaders will come in and sort of present, and you can tell there's maybe not that alignment. And so I've sort of told some of the founders and CEOs and CFOs I work with to it's not about growth at all costs. It's not doom or gloom either, but let's get everyone on the same page. Top tier leaders, have them talk to their managers and their employees. Let's all orient towards more efficient growth. Maybe it's a simple metric like ARR per employee, right? That's become very popular. But something firm wide that everyone can rally against, really understand something that's tangible, get everyone on the same page. I think that's pretty important as well.
It's so funny you mentioned ARR per employee. I was running my last company in 2018, and at that time, the ARR per employee was like suddenly a metric that came into vogue. And then, like by mid 2019, everyone forgot about it. So everyone
Yeah,
like tracked it for like a solid 6 months, and then was like, "Oh, no need now."
yeah, and it all comes back to that, right? Because if you look at SaaS businesses, we're all in the business. 99.9% of what is B2B SaaS. 85, 90%, 80 to 90% of your expenses are going to be people, right? And yet some people have individuals in lower cost sort of countries and areas, but by and large, that's what it's going to be. And you kind of need to be at 300K plus of ARR per employee at scale to even be at that sort of break even-ish place, given where salaries and overhead and benefits are today. And so it's worth it to even track. Honestly, I'll meet a 3-5 million ARR company, and if they give me an employee headcount, I almost know right away is this going to be efficient or not on the B2B
Mm.
side and how they're building and growing their business.
Oh, that's such a good point. Do you have like I like the 300K benchmark at scale? Do you have sort of benchmarks in your mind of how you build up to 300K? 'Cause like, when your first million, it's not going to be like 300K. You're not going to be
Yeah.
three people, right? But like, obviously, at some point, it needs to come down. So like, do you have ways to think about that in your head?
I do in my head. We've run some analysis on this on our portfolio and as well as companies we look at. And to be clear, I look at companies typically when they're 3 or 5 of ARR at the early end, so post product market fit,
Yeah.
and then all the way onwards. If I'm seeing a company that's kind of 5 to 20 of ARR, ideally, I would love for them to be a 50K per employee. So if you're 5 million of ARR and you have 100 employees, that's fine. The last company I got close to investing in 3, 4, 5 months ago was 5.5 of ARR and 55 employees. It was at 100K of ARR per employee already at that scale and going from 1 to 7 in that kind of second year of selling. That's obviously the ideal case. Not every company can be like that, but the lower end is usually that 50K is my gut feel of where they should be at that scale, and then hopefully grow into it and get even more efficient as they get to the 250 ARR scale.
Oh, that's so good. That's like a really helpful benchmark. And then I guess like pre-product market fit, do you think it matters, or you should just be looking at different things?
I think I don't know about AR employee. I don't think you should hire 50 employees in general if you don't have product market fit, but you probably need 5, 10, 15, 20 to kind of figure it out and experiment and build. Some products are more complex than others, right? It might take 8 engineers just to build something for a year and look at that. Actually, what's interesting, I remember looking at Figma in their early days and incredibly efficient go-to-market engine once they started growing, but they spent a decent chunk of capital before they even got their million or two. But when you looked at what they build and the multiplayer and the rendering of people collaborating, the design surface and the prototyping all in one, and I remember talking to customers when there were 3 or 4 of there. I was like, oh, I get it. This is not just a simple SaaS point solution. They got to spend a lot on product development. So for me, in those earlier days, it's a little bit hard. It's really once they start to go to market, how efficiently are sort of they doing it company wide.
Mm, so good. One of the things I think about when it comes to preserving cash now and then making sure that you're like deploying it in a way that's going to have the highest ROI. I think about the fact that like in like 1, 2, 3 years, the best in class companies are still going to look like ones that didn't necessarily have like a huge slowdown or didn't have like a huge dip or something, like you can imagine the best in class companies are going to look like pretty impressive the whole way through. Um, and that makes me wonder for folks operating in like 5 million plus ARR businesses today, how do they give themselves the best shot at being one of the best in class companies while also making sure that their capital spend isn't dumb? It seems like a very hard sort of balancing act, and I don't know if you've seen people who are exceptionally good at it or yeah, anything like that.
It's hard, and a lot of things. You're obviously speaking to me at a time period where the current environment is just omnipresent and is going to be filtered. Everything that I'm saying is in the context of the current environment, which I do expect, frankly, to last for the next 2 to 3 years, and I do think is a healthy way to build your business, regardless. But to me, what I look for with companies that are pitching me or building the next sort of great business is more proactivity around again, managing the runway, managing the hiring, being a little bit more conservative in this environment, I think is going to be critical. At the same time, not to get overly excited on either side of the coin, right? Again, not doom and gloom, not let's hire it all, let's hire 100 people because we had one great quarter. It's hard not to do that, but you got to kind of stay even keeled, and then again be proactive. Do things before you feel like you really need to do them. From being somewhat sort of conservative, I think those are the management teams and CEOs being measured. That's going to instill confidence in the rest of their organization as well. I think that's going to be critical here. And actually, I would posit something different. I think even there's 0.1% of companies, Sidharth, that you may not see any slowdown this year relative to last. I think there's 99.9% of companies, even the best of the best, that especially relative to the last 2 years, there will be some slowdown. Doesn't mean they're not great companies. It means, okay, let's slow everything down. Let's reevaluate what's working, what's not, and then let's emerge out of the other side, whether that's next year or the year after, or the year after that. Hopefully not that long. We can kind of invest in really strong growth more. At least that's what we're seeing across a lot of companies.
Yeah. How do you think about let's say it is the year after, or you have to plan around that, then you start having to ask yourself about the amount of runway you have to make it that long, especially if it's the year after the year after. And you kind of have to start thinking about like availability of VC dollars at that point. And it's like, everything is fuzzy right now, right? Like no one knows what the future
Yes.
holds. But yeah, like, do you feel like for great companies, they'll have avenues to be able to survive that long?
Yeah. I think plenty. I mean, if you're a great, what happens always in these markets is there's that flight to quality, flight to safety that's going to happen. And if you are a higher performing company, right, in the top maybe decile of the startups that are out there, there's going to be plenty of capital, right? Even if some crossover funds maybe invest less, some sovereign wealth funds maybe invest less. Maybe private equity funds that thought they wanted to do venture investing, they close up shop. You look at Sapphire, I mean, our capital base has grown significantly over the years, right? We're managing over $10 billion of capital. That might be up, don't quote me on that, but 3 to 5x just in the last sort of 5 to 7 years, right? And that's similar to a lot of funds like Sapphire. They've been doing this for 2-3 decades. And so just right there in more core institutional sort of capital bases, there's plenty of capital left for the best of the best companies. And we're eager. It's not people, entrepreneurs like, hey, are you active or not active? As if I don't want to be active. I want to be active. A lot of companies are raising because a lot of them have capital and their board have advised them don't raise because we're sitting at maybe a high valuation, and why take a down round or more dilution than you need to if you can kind of grow for one more year. I get that. I'm advising my companies to do the same thing. But we are eager and active, me and I'm sure many others in the ecosystem.
That's cool. You talked about ARR per head. Are there other metrics that you think are really important to generally obsess over and then obsess over now?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we all know the gross and net retention, the magic number. I would say a couple that are probably less scrutinized, but I think should be more now and in general, frankly, are one, gross retention. Everyone always talks about let's correlate net retention, 130%. You trade a lot better in the public markets. I actually think I love companies that can have ideally 90, if not 95% plus gross retention, just super sticky. Again, particularly in an environment like this where upselling, if it's due to seats or otherwise, might be hard, but you can protect and really take care of your installed base and earn the right to sell them more later on. If you're doing that, I think that's super sticky and super valuable to any business. So I try to pay close attention to that. I know there will be some slippage here because companies will be challenged to renew. But I look at that as a critical metric. For example, if a company has 70% gross retention, but 130% net retention, even though it's 130 net, I would still be wary of investing in that company. And then the second, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I want to find a way to quantitatively measure it outside of percentage of revenue, but R&D efficiency. I think there is the reason why we're all venture capitalists and maybe not private equity folks is because we do geek out to the product too. Even at Sapphire, we're Series B onwards. I love a really good product that I can touch and feel is solving it. And it's been this conventional wisdom to point at sales and marketing. We know the quota and attainment and reduce this, your magic number. There's no R&D efficiency metric outside of your R&D as a percentage of sales relative to Datadog is not as good. So fix it. That's not good enough. And so I do look at those benchmarks, and I try to look at really great companies because I think in the last 5 years, people have just spent a lot of R&D and a lot of initiatives that haven't worked, or the velocity or productivity isn't there. So I look at the benchmarks of companies from 3-5 years ago and align them to my companies. But I also honestly, it's about keeping, and it's somewhat challenging, the head of product or head of engineering to say, what were the milestones you said you were going to achieve? Did you achieve them? How much did you spend to achieve them? And what's the yield on that? What is the yield on this new piece of product? Like, those are conversations that for the last, frankly, even 5 years, we haven't had. It's like, oh, that sounds like a great new product. And those 3 customers said they want it. Let's go do it. What's the market opportunity? What's the first 2 years ARR relative to the engineering spend? Getting a little bit more numerical and accountable on R&D, I think is critical. It's not just a sales quota issue when people talk about efficiency.
How do you think about yield in those situations?
Yeah, it's hard. Well, one is just holding them accountable, right? I think that's the first step. It's like, how long will this take? And is it taking sort of longer than expected? And 2 is having some sort of multiplier that you think will be sticky. I mean, part of that is also the decision process that they go to. Are we building new products for the sake of building new products, or can this product is it being wanted by our customers? Are we listening to the feedback? And is there a big sort of market opportunity? If it's, hey, we have a $100 million business and we think this can grow into a $10, $20 million opportunity, and that's going to take sort of 5-7 years, that's less interesting to me versus this is going to be the next leg of our growth, the next 100 million of ARR in the next 5 to 7 years. And therefore, let's staff a lot of engineers against it. Particularly when you have opportunity cost of not focusing on the core platform, right? So it needs to be a big enough opportunity, and then look back every quarter, 2 quarters to say, hey, we thought we were going to achieve 3 of ARR, we achieved 300K. Is this really working or not? Is that because the Salesforce is not enabled, or maybe the product wasn't good? I think we kind of lost a little bit of that hygiene over time.
I totally agree with you. I really think that product and engineering teams should sign up for or take responsibility for ARR in almost the same way that the exec team does. Or, it's not quite the same as a sales leader, but like they should take a little bit more sort of responsibility for that. The fact that they do actually drive ARR, they do drive customer retention.
We developed this new product, and I think it's going to deliver 3 million of ARR. If it didn't, like, that should be part of their KPIs, right? Right now, it's not really. It's like, well, the salespeople didn't sell it well enough. And again, everyone has a responsibility in it. I think that's the mantra I'm trying to bring to the boardroom: is get everyone aligned, ask everyone, what is the yield? How much are you spending? You realize even if there's not a perfect benchmark of an engineer costs you 225K and they need to produce that, even though I do think we should get to that level of granularity in the future. Like on a per FTE basis, right? A per function, what is the yield? We don't have that level of clarity in SaaS today. Even if it's not that, just forcing the conversation kind of helps people second guess and figure out, what do I really want to focus on, right? Versus building 4 products. What's the one thing I really want to focus
on? When companies are pitching you and you're trying to figure out, do they actually have a great product? How do you go about figuring that out?
It's not easy. I probably get it wrong more than I get it right. One of the things at least we do at Sapphire is we do a lot of outside-in work. I think there's nothing that substitutes great customer references and customer work. And we actually try to talk to customers that churned as well to figure out how negative was it really, or is there something that can be developed that they would actually go back to the product. So the customer references and diligence that we do is critical, and we try to. It's nuanced, right? Because you can always find in a customer some persona that absolutely loves a product, but they may only spend $1,000 on it, and there may be 10 other tools in that enterprise that enterprise is spending 50K, 100K, but that one person you got to loves this thing, right? But that's the only person in the organization. So you got to be more nuanced and say, where does this fall stack rank relative to the other 5 tools you, Mr. Finance person or Mr. Marketer or Mrs. Salesperson, uses, right? Where does it fall? Is it nice to have? Is it must to have? What's your willingness to pay? What if the price doubled next year or year after? Would you still pay for it? Would you still be interested? Those are the questions that lead you to know, okay, I don't just love this product because it helped me out here and there. I would almost want to move jobs if my company did not have this tool, right? And so we try to press and get to that level of qualitative understanding in addition to quantitative, rank this from 1 to 5 with every single customer. And then, of course, from a metrics perspective, yes, you could have an amazing sales force that's selling a bad product and doing so efficiently, but ideally, if it's a really good product, you should see it flying off the shelf in terms of how much inbound, how it's converting, the pipeline generation, the sales attainment. Usually those are tied relatively well versus pushing a boulder up a hill with a product that isn't maybe developed well or is in a market that's just maybe too small or isn't ready for it.
That's such a good point. It's funny because it's a very customer-focused view on it. And I personally believe that the expert on my product is not me or our team. The expert on my product are the users who are using it regularly, because they understand it at a deeper level than even we understand it. So it makes so much sense to take a super customer-oriented view on like what is the quality of the product.
Yeah. And again, it's about pressing it in 6 different ways, and we rank it on an NPS scale, and we we measure that versus all the other customer references calls from Figmas to Gongs to this to that we've done, some of the best calls that we've done. And so that's kind of how we gauge whether there's really strong conviction.
It's interesting because some of these companies, they're all phenomenal companies, right? But then there's the fact that they're sort of B2B companies, and many of them are top down. And when you're selling top down, sometimes you do end up selling a product that like checks all the boxes rather than is like the most wonderful thing in the world to use. And I'm wondering, do you find that like there's cases where you've either invested in or not invested in, but looked at businesses which are spectacular businesses, but by all of these measures, the product is like kind of crap?
Yeah. Well, I would never out any of my companies or any company I looked at to be like that. No, you know why? Because what you just hit on is the reason why what me and you do, it's an evergreen market. Because it's almost inevitable, right? You're young, a young company, you develop an amazing product that no one else has really done, and then you sort of do it. There's copycats, you learn, you grow, you become big. And at some point, you add so many bells and whistles, it becomes complex, or it's a top-down sale, and your distribution is so strong with C-suite executives of Global 2000 enterprises that the product innovation doesn't really need to keep up because your sales force and your go-to-market is so strong. So that complacency happens. That what happens. Then Sidharth starts a new company that disrupts that company, right? And so that's why it's evergreen. Now, fortunately, we're trying to get in again with Series B, C, D, where we get to ride that journey up. And we've seen it many times before. We invested in Exact Target, way back when, and now we're investing in Braze, right? And maybe there will be a next generation of Braze. I hope not, but maybe there will be, right? We're invested in Outreach, who's kind of created and built and broken out to a leadership position. I'm sure they'll be that. I led our investment in Captivate IQ, that's disrupting Exactly's business, or Sixth Sense, that's disrupting Demand Base, or you have all these next generation of Anaplan, FP&A planning kind of businesses. So there's always these next generation of business that's inevitable. We usually don't get in that late stage. I'd like to think all of our companies and products are the whiz-bang amazing ones of the year or decade, hopefully. But that is just a natural part of our ecosystem.
Yeah, well, makes total sense.
Yeah.
As the market environment has changed and people are focusing more on metrics that they maybe weren't looking at for a while, or different things become really important, like the gross customer retention point is such an important point when net revenue retention is going to be much harder to achieve since you can't get seat-based upsells and all that stuff. So as some of that transforms, I'm curious, what do you think is the role of the CFO in sort of the new environment that their companies are living in?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's so interesting how it's changed. It used to be, hey, Mrs. CFO, how do I just unlock investment for me so I can grow well? Can you tell a great story to Wall Street when we go public? And kind of almost be a cheerleader a little bit. And I think, again, the last 2 to 4 years were just atypical. The role of the CFO should be kind of what it is today. And I think the best ones, frankly, from what I've seen, they need to gain the respect, really, of not just a no person, but gain the respect of all the functional leaders, but also be able to stand up to the CEO, the founder CEO, which isn't easy to do in many cases, when they see something that's sort of not right, or they think they should do something differently. Those are the best CFOs that kind of really can work within the team. They're a true thought partner. They have the respect of everyone. They can take a holistic view of what makes the business. And it's not just a quick output to a financial spreadsheet, but there's people and there's nuances and a rhythm to every business and market behind it. And again, they can kind of stand up to that CEO. The great CFOs I've seen can understand trade-offs really well. Hey, we're not investing in this. This is what it's going to cost us. But instead we're going to do this, and here's how it impacts the 3-year model. Like, that level of nuance is incredibly helpful, and they give other people framework. Like we were just talking about engineering, right? They give other people framework to think about spend versus yield, and always reporting in that way. I think that's critical. And then finally, giving those functional leaders, particularly the CEO or HR leaders, if they have to make a hard decision, what is the language to use internally? Obviously, the founder CEO, that's largely comes from from them, right? And their inspiration and storytelling ability and leadership ability. But CFOs can be great leaders too, and they should learn. They know the language also to use to kind of walk that line in an organization.
Super good points. Actually, related, earlier this year, you and your team wrote an awesome blog post called The Rise of the Next Generation CFO. And you wrote about sort of the CFO's expanding area of responsibility. What do you think is the expanding part? And like, what are they being asked to take on, at least the best CFOs and the CEOs who know how to get the most out of their CFOs?
Yeah, I mean, a large part of that is what we just talked about, right? Becoming more strategic again, not just for investors, but internally being a glue person around all of these functional areas versus kind of being the quote unquote bean counter, right? That's just reporting out on things, actually in the decision making process for these things and being a respected leader. Um, so that's one critical area. I also think it's gone beyond, purely financial data reporting. I think there's a lot of operational data that in conjunction with RevOps or other leaders, the CFOs being asked to kind of help understand implications for strategy and market positioning, and again, product and engineering. What does the customer journey look like? Analyzing pipeline and funnel metrics. What's driving net dollar expansion and splitting that out. The level of detail that we're asking CFOs to go in on these more operational KPIs, and then again, drawing that to how does that impact the strategy and positioning of the business. Again, that used to be sort of all the CEO, but the CFO can come up with a lot of these insights based on these more operational kind of metrics as well.
Yeah, I mean, as a CEO, it's kind of the dream of like someone who's really able to help you think through some of these things and take it kind of to the next level. So, yeah, totally
Exactly.
with you.
Exactly. I think the CFO in this context is kind of the the 1A, most important person in the room in terms of not taking anything away from the other functional leaders, but really, and it's again, not just because they're saying no and trying to cut costs. It's developing that really nuanced view and the scenario modeling and protecting the business, right? In an uncertain demand environment.
So if you call all the things you just said as like the ideal of what you want your CEO to be, and then if you think about like what is sort of the gap that either is true for some companies or a lot of companies, what makes it hard to be at that ideal? Like, what are the barriers
For the ideal CFO.
for the CFO to be able to do their absolute best, most ideal work? Like, what can leave them not empowered enough?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. That's a tricky question. One is always going to be a person. Most things in life are personality, right? Interpersonal skills, EQ, and so every person should always find a setting where they're interviewing and getting along with the folks, and they feel like they have a founder CEO that is willing to be their thought partner, right? And willing to be receptive and coachable. And by the way, it's tricky because the best entrepreneurs and founders and CEOs I've worked with are coachable, even at big scale and from their management team and from investors. But at the same time, they take all of that data and they still kind of do their own thing half the time. And that's what makes them great. And they end up being right 4 to 5 times because they have this gut feeling about their business. But they got to be coachable. You have to have open and honest conversations. That's more of a personality thing, I would say. That is there for the CFO. I mean, there's a lot of things from a technology and data perspective, frankly, that I think just to do the actual tactical work for a CFO or a finance team that make it hard, right? Whether it's data and all these different silos of billing information or your CRM or your ERP or your general ledger, how do you get that into a view of your business that makes sense, that's consistent, right? ARR can be defined in 20 different ways across 20 different systems. And so there are those things, of course, as well that are real challenges.
Totally true. I mean, it's interesting. You just talked about systems, and one of the things that you talked about in the article that I also have found to be, I really also believe, is that in the future, the next generation of finance will be driven by the convergence with data science.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about it and why you believe that to be the case.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are seeing, well, one, there's all these different sort of data sets, right? So how do you sort of combine them together and make use of it? That's kind of a data problem in and of itself. One of the things that we're seeing also is that people are dumping all of that data into a central cloud data warehouse, a Snowflake or the GCP or AWS. And the question is how do you extract that, right? And make the best use out of that data for insights for the rest of the business, but also for the CFO and finance department. So I do think there is this um, data sort of science element, whether it's transforming the data or modeling the data or setting up the data schema, that is now more involved. I do think that there hopefully will be a next generation set of tools that won't require super deep data expertise, frankly, within the finance organization in order to get access to it. But today, I think that's certainly the case.
Yeah. I mean, we're very familiar with the requirements of the data knowledge requirements of the finance teams, because that's obviously the world we live in. So, preaching to the choir on that one. The other thing that was sort of one of the predictions y'all had was around demand for real-time financial data. Why is real-time so important for finance leaders to have?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to the environment as well. Although I think from a hygiene perspective, it should always be that way. It just allows folks to react quickly to changes in the market environment, right? And better predict the future. I think being able to review your metrics on a daily basis, whether it's a CFO or even transmitting portions of that data to their marketing leader or
Yeah.
to the founder and CEO, right? I think is critical, particularly for early stage businesses, but I think even for later stage businesses when it comes to certain decisions around, again, for example, marketing allocation and resource allocation for certain areas. So you just make sure you don't have wasteful spend and you're not surprised at the end of the month on how much you burned or how much you spent on certain things. It allows you to be a little bit more nimble and agile in making these resource allocation decisions.
Yeah. It's sort of like the CFO's job is to kind of nudge the business on a daily basis to go on the right path, right? And those nudges, they kind of add up.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, they may not cut something right then, but they may get alerted to something that went from sort of a greenish area in their mind to a yellowish area, and then it's worth having a conversation about it and understanding why are things sort of trending that way, right?
Um, you've invested in some really incredible companies, like best-in-class companies in their category, and SaaS broadly. And presumably, you've worked with some incredible CFOs in the process. So I'm curious, in your mind, what sets a really great CFO apart?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to what I mentioned before. An ability to again not just read out on the financials. You get the kind of board deck, and then they get to the financial section, and they're sort of reading every line. Everyone sort of can understand that, but what are the implications of that, right? Being able to double down and double click on certain sort of misses or spend areas or KPIs, and really understand at a very granular level why that particular thing happened and what the implications are going forward. Not just in terms of investment, but again, relating that to product, relating that to market positioning, market maturity. What are they seeing and what are they hearing? Again, it should be someone who's a liaison and gains the trust and respect of all the other leaders in the organization. And so that doesn't mean just sales give you your budget, marketing give you your budget, but really hear what's going on. What is the nuance? What is the customer feedback? By the way, I always think everyone in an organization should sit on calls with customers and kind of learn what customers are thinking. That includes the CFO, right? Not just a product person. And so I think becoming a strategic thinker and thought partner from that perspective, I think really sets the greatest CFOs apart. And again, as I mentioned, not easy to do, but those who can sort of stand up to the CEO. Maybe I'm painting a bad light of CEOs. I love all my CEOs, but it's gain the respect, right? Gain the respect of the founder CEO so they can have a conversation. The feedback is taken and maybe persuade them, change their mind from time to time if need be. Very hard to do, but the best ones can do that.
I mean, that makes total sense, right? We're all blind to whatever we're blind to, and having someone who can sort of alert us to some of those things is just a net positive, no matter who you are and how good you are at it.
Completely agree. Completely agree.
Yeah. Um, One of the things that we've seen in working with the companies and CFOs that we work with is the stage at which companies decide to sort of invest in the finance team can vary a lot, like a lot. And so, two-part question here: how do you think about the right stages to invest and grow that finance team? And two, who's the right type of top finance leader in your company, whatever their title may be, at various points in the company's journey, you think?
Yeah, and feel free to ask follow-ups if I don't hit on it exactly. I think earlier the better. Do you need a strategic CFO who's taking the company public if you're 2 million of ARR? Probably not. But what I'm finding at 1 or 2 or 3 of ARR, the CEO, founder, or some other person with slightly great Excel skills is doing all of that work. I'd love to see some sort of even director of finance at sub 5 million of ARR who can really dig into the data, understand it, who's done it maybe one time before. You're already out there raising your Series B. I mean, that's real money and real capital investment that you're asking from investors. And so having your house in order and understanding what it all means is critical, not just for investors, but of course for running a very strong business. I think you can kind of graduate. These are just rough when I look at companies, probably a VP of finance from 5 to kind of 20-ish and really have the CFO that you hope can take you to probably 100, maybe not IPO, but probably 100 as you get to about 2025 of ARR. Again, we're scaling that to 200 million of ARR.
Cool. I think the message that is helpful here is sort of like, as soon as you have numbers that are worth paying attention to, make sure you have someone whose job it is to pay attention and guide the business.
Yeah.
But then the level of the person will sort of vary as there's more complexity associated with it. Does that sound like a rough summary?
That's exactly right. Yeah, well said.
Cool. Um, when I'm sure you've seen points in your companies when a new CFO comes on board. What do you sort of see the best ones do in their first 90 days?
Ooh.
At least from your perspective, I know that you're not in there day to day, but I'm sure you get some exposure as a board member.
You know what it often is? It's hygiene in closing the books, like being able to report. Maybe we talked about real time. I've noticed in some of my companies where eventually they realize, gosh, we need a new CFO and maybe new FP&A and accounting. I asked them, maybe 2 weeks after the quarter, say, hey, how did it look high level? And they kind of don't know, right? Or they're unsure. And the first thing that a new CFO is like, hey, we need to clean this process. We need to clean up this process of being able to close the books as much as you can. Again, we're not all publicly traded companies, and be able to report that out to investors and internally. How did we do? And that goes from being quarterly to monthly, and then hopefully, as we mentioned, the panacea is continuous monitoring, which there's barely any tools out there to help you do. But that's kind of the first thing that they do. Yes, of course, they bring in their 3 favorite people from their prior job. That's natural. That's any operating leader, right? But that is interesting in terms of that. That's a trend I've noticed that they kind of start with as well.
It kind of ties back into your
Yeah.
point earlier about data quality.
Yeah, it really does. They press deep on hygiene and data quality, and we got to know what's going on. Where's our numbers? How good are we at the numbers? Like, do we know? Like, it's that they certainly focus a lot on that. Yeah.
That's cool. I have one main sort of last question for you, which is as an investor in growth stage businesses, in an ideal world, what's a level deeper you wish your exec teams could go in their either financial data or SaaS metrics or the way that they like sort of understand how the business is doing? Like, what's a level deeper that you sort of consistently find? I wish.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I wish this, I'll be honest, even investors don't have the perfect answer to it. It's what I discussed before, which is we all have sales KPIs, and even somewhat marketing. But I would like to see more there, right? And really dissecting sales, marketing variable spend. How should it turn into revenue? R&D, right? What is good engineering efficiency versus product efficiency? And trying to really tie that to revenue, and at least everyone talking about it, I think is critical. But then eventually we're going to get to a place for a B2B SaaS business that we are able to tie that to actual productivity sort of metrics. The other thing I've been thinking about a lot recently is sort of like this natural rate of growth of companies. Because we're asking a lot of companies now, okay, you're growing 70%, you're burning $50 million. If you grow 40%, maybe you'll burn proportionally less. What are 4 over 7 times 50, right? Less. I don't think that's the case. Businesses, like there's like almost like an efficient frontier of growth versus efficiency for businesses based on the product they have, the market and the quality of their team, right? But the market that they're operating in. Some businesses, the natural rate of growth might be 30%, and that's okay. Let's not keep putting money against this market. If 30% is the rate of growth, and if we can do that at a break even, that's a great business. You could do that for 5-7 years. You'll wake up, you'll have this wonderfully huge business that creates a lot of value for shareholders. Some businesses can grow at 80% a year and do that without burning too much, right? So what is that efficient? It really depends on the business, the end market, the market maturity. There's not enough discussion around that. I think in the last few years, capital was so free and flooding, and everyone, it was largely people like my fault, that everyone's like, well, we all can be 150% business. We just need more capital. And that's just not the case. There is some efficient frontier based on the business. So we're trying to have those conversations in our partnership and try to be a little bit more nuanced. What does this business really feel like? They're 20 today. When it hits 200 of ARR, what will it look like, right?
I really like that. I've always been a huge fan of Rule of 40 and found that the companies maintain the Rule of 40 for much longer than one would have thought. Like it doesn't actually change so much over time.
I agree. Yeah. Oh, that's a great one too. And there's actually a new, a lot of VCs now are pushing towards Rule of 60 because you see that the top 10 or 12 companies, of course, that are valued at 12, 14x revenue still are kind of more than 60%. But no, I think 40 is great and something that hopefully all of our companies should aspire to hitting.
Yeah, it does look like a lot of folks went a lot below Rule of 40. So I feel like 40s is as good place as any to start. Well, you have to get to 40 on the way to 60. So.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Well, it's hard. Listen, what happened was last year companies grew so fast and so well, and frankly, relatively efficiently, that coming into Q3 and Q4, we were sitting in budget conversations with companies saying, well, hey, look at us. We just grew 100% at a big scale, 50 million, 100 million of ARR. We all have a lot of these companies. Now let's put the pedal to, we were 1x magic number in burn ratios. Let's put the pedal to the metal. Let's hire a lot. And as a board member and as an operator, you're like, yeah, okay, that kind of makes sense. You just killed it and maybe we can do it again. And now let's spend more against it, especially if we grow another 100% at scale. And then it's not that the companies became worse necessarily. It's that the demand environment became softer. Now the labor environment became hard too. When you have to hire that many people and unemployment rates, how do you keep the quality bar that high, right? So between that and the demand environment, it becomes hard. So yeah, the Rule of 40 this year is tenuous, but I do think the best of the best companies will find a way to make mature decisions and get there in the next sort of 2 years.
Yeah. Okay. All amazing points. This is awesome.
Right?
I really, really appreciate the time and all the insights.
You as well.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Before you go, let me give you a super quick overview of what Subscript is, because chances are we can help you. I started Subscript because in my last business, I had this problem. We had this giant Google spreadsheet, and that's where we kept track of everything about our business. And if you're anything like me, you're a data-driven leader who really cares to understand numbers in order to make sure that you're making the right decisions. But when you're looking at a giant spreadsheet with lots of just tabs on tabs on tabs and lots of people with access, you're probably not looking at the right thing, because you can never be confident that someone didn't mess something up, or that someone didn't fat finger a number, or that you considered all the corner cases that you actually needed to consider. So that's what Subscript does. We help you understand your subscription business at a much deeper level than you ever thought possible. If you'd be interested in giving it a try, come check us out at subscript.com.